So let's talk about the war on carbs, man. That's like a thing that's trending all over social media. The war on carbs, and people will tout about just having carnivore diet is basically one of them. Just basically kind of eating high protein, high fat, keeping the carbs as low as possible. I don't think that's optimally. Listen, the ground is always in the middle, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
The answer to everything always lies in the middle.
Exactly.
So there has to be a good balance of everything. There's no reason to not have carbs. As many carbs as you. Like I said, there's definitely a threshold for everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's a little different. Once you find that threshold, then you're good. But balance is always going to be the best approach.
I agree 100%. And like I said, the ratio and things like that, they're going to be a little bit different from person to person. So when you give like a blanket statement like carbs are what causes you to gain fat, it's a silly statement to make. Or the reason you're gaining weight is because of carbs. Again, it's going to be context dependent. It's going to be person dependent. So I don't recommend anybody follow the same diet plan that someone else is doing. So when you give a cookie cutter plan, like, okay, only eat protein and fats, it might work for somebody, very small percentage of the population, where when I say work, it might be better than eating carbs for somebody. Again, in certain situations, it's not going to be the best for everybody. No one plan is going to be the best for everybody.
Right. So mechanistically, what happens when you consume carbohydrates? People say like, oh, your insulin levels are going to spike. And that's true to extent with all the food you eat. Your insulin levels do spike.
Yeah.
Carbs, it does spike a lot. And this is where people with type 1 diabetes, like my dad, their pancreas doesn't work to control their insulin levels. So typically why this came about was because people say all the time, well, when you have carbs, you're going to spike your sugar, and that's what's going to cause weight gain, because when your insulin levels are high like that, that all that's going to get stored into body fat. Now, you got to remember too, in a general sense, yes, if somebody just consumes table sugar, that definitely happens. But there's a lot of variables that will change that. Are you an active individual? Yeah. Do you weight train a couple times a week? People forget one of the biggest ways to control insulin is by working out.
Absolutely.
Your muscles respond to insulin. That's just one of the things that they do. So they respond to insulin. So whenever you have, they work better to make insulin work better is what I mean. So you start training, you start exercising, your body's going to absorb more of that insulin better. It makes it more efficient. Right. So people just take that one little snippet and just say, oh, you can't have carbs because it raises your insulin levels.
Right. And people don't realize too that, bodybuilders take insulin to grow muscle. I'm talking about enhanced bodybuilders, right? So that tells you right there that insulin itself is very important for muscle building.
That's so crazy to me, man.
It is. It's
so my dad's type 1 diabetic, which basically means that his insulin doesn't work and he has to take insulin.
Right.
So my dad said, I told my dad once, I'm like, people take this stuff recreationally to gain muscle. He said to me, are they crazy? He goes, if I give myself too much, I could be dead.
Oh yeah, it could kill you, absolutely.
So, and he needs that, and he's saying that. So can you imagine not needing it and then taking it? That's wild.
Right. Yeah, I don't condone that. It's not like I'm recommending it, but it just
sounds like you are.
It just
sounds like you are.
It's a great example because, and the reason I use that as an example is everybody that goes on about these new trends and fad diets, they like to use anecdote as the answer. So they say like, oh, cavemen didn't eat like this, and look, they didn't have body fat, right? So we should eat like cavemen, or whatever it is. When they talk about, like, remember the paleo diet? They said, oh, they didn't have all these issues, they ate these foods, right? Same thing, but like, then these same guys will look at it and say, oh, you don't need to eat carbs to build muscle, but at the same time, you have pro bodybuilders taking insulin, who are the largest bodybuilders on the planet, right? But they don't want to look at that. Again, I'm not promoting that you take insulin, but I'm just saying when you eat carbohydrates, it raises insulin. And that's one of the main reasons that post-workout, pre-post-workout nutrition is two of the best times of the day to consume your carbohydrates. Body's much more insulin sensitive. After you work out, those carbs are more likely to be stored in the muscle rather than in the fat cells, So it's all about utilizing these tools properly. So carbohydrates are a tool, it's a dietary tool. If you use them properly, you can use them to their advantage. If you use them improperly, sure, there's negatives to it. You eat too many carbs, you eat too many calories, of course you're gonna gain fat. But if you eat the right amount and you do something like weight train, you have a proper lifestyle, your body fat levels don't get out of control, those carbohydrates are going to be beneficial. So again, you can't look at one thing and cherry pick and say, okay, carbs are bad because of this.
So what's your thoughts on the whole war on carbs and what those people are touting about? okay, you can't have any carbs, just eat meat, and that's it.
Yeah, it's so you kind of have two schools of thought from people that promote like no carb eating. One school of thought is like you said, they say the reason you're getting fat is because of insulin. So if you just remove your carbs, you can eat whatever you want. You don't have to count calories, this, that, and the other thing, and you won't get fat. That's the one argument, right? Then you have people on the other end of the spectrum who do follow that same low carb approach, but they say, I understand that carbs don't inherently make you fat. It's too many calories, but if you remove carbs from your diet, you're less likely to overeat because carbs are very highly palatable foods. So if you remove them from the diet, it just makes sticking to the diet easier, and because I can stick to the diet easier, I'm better off not having carbs.
And that might be true to some extent.
And I agree. I think there's some merit there, but at the same time, I could definitely overeat calories even if I don't eat carbs.
Yeah.
So for me, that wouldn't do anything. I would still have to track my food intake. But again, if you're still isolating one part of the diet, you're not fixing the overall solution, which the overall solution is you're just eating too much food. If you do take carbs out of your diet and that helps you not eat so much food, great. But you should be able to still fit those carbs in. Like, there's nothing wrong with eating a small amount of carbs and cutting yourself off. And that's the big thing I think people miss is they just need to understand how to control their eating habits better than restricting themselves. Because restriction is not what's going to solve the problem. It's controlling and managing it that's going to solve the problem.
So we were talking about this earlier before, and you said that now some of these carnivore people are recommending eating carnivore and apples. Well,
yeah, that's like a new trend now too. Like,
so it's meat and apples.
So this is the thing. So it's pretty much it's
meat and apples.
It's carnivore plus a little bit of fruit. I think that's what it is. A lot of these guys, and I'm not gonna call out specific names because I don't know enough information to say that I'm 100% accurate with the statement. But if you just kind of go back and look, what I'm saying probably falls in line with the truth. A lot of these guys that do carnivore now originally were guys that were either vegans or followed some type of those diets before. So they went vegan and they told everybody vegan is the best way to live. It's the healthiest diet. Then they got small, they lost muscle mass, they got weak, they got sick, and they said, okay, I'm going to go keto. Then they went keto and they told everybody keto is the best diet. Then they went carnivore. Oh, you know what? I thought I had it right with keto, but carnivore is the answer. Now a lot of these guys are going, oh, carnivore was good, but you need carnivore plus fruit. Which I think, again, if we're talking in phases, pretty soon they're going to go, you know what the best diet is? Carnivore plus carbs.
Yeah.
And then they're just eating a normal diet. And I can predict that that's going to happen with a lot of them.